Chapter 22 Merry Christmas. At length, toward noon, upon the final dismissal of the ship's riggers, after the Peaquod had been hauled out from the wharf, and after the ever-thoughtful Charity had come off in a whaleboat with her last gift, a nightcap for Stubbs, the second mate, her brother-in-law, and a spare Bible for the steward, after all, the two captains, Peleg and Bildad, issued from the cabin, and turning to the chief mate Peleg, said, "Now, Mr. Starbuck, are you sure everything is right? Captain Ahab is all ready. Just spoke to him. Nothing more to be got from shore, eh? Well, call all hands then. Muster a mast from here. Blast them." "No need for profane words, however great the hurry, Peleg," said Bildad. "But away with thee, friend Starbuck, and do our bidding. How now?" Here, upon the very point of starting for the voyage, Captain Peleg and Captain Bildad were going it with a high hand on the quarter-deck, just as if they were to be joint commanders at sea, as well as to all appearances in port. As for Captain Ahab, no sign of him was yet to be seen, only they saw he was in the cabin. But then the idea was that his presence was by no means necessary in getting the ship under way, and steering her well out to sea. Indeed, as that was not at all his proper business, but the pilot, and as he was not yet completely recovered, so they say. Therefore, Captain Ahab stayed below. All this seemed natural enough, especially as in the merchant service many captains never show themselves on deck for a considerable time after heaving up the anchor, but remain over the cabin table having a farewell merrymaking with their shore friends, before they quit the ship for good with the pilot. But there was not much chance to think over the matter, for Captain Peleg was now all alive. He seemed to do most of the talking and commanding, and not Bildad. "Aft here, ye sons of bachelors," he cried as the sailors lingered at the mainmast. "Mr. Starbuck, drive 'em aft." "Strike the tent there," was the next order. As I hinted before, this whalebone marquee was never pitched, except in port, and on board the Pequod for 30 years the order to strike the tent was well known to be the next thing to heaving up the anchor. "Man the capstan, blood and thunder, jump," was the next command, and the crew sprang for the handspike. Now, getting under way, the station generally occupied by the pilot was the forward part of the ship, and here Bildad, who was with Peleg, be it known, in addition to his other officers, was one of the licensed pilots of the port, he being suspected to have got himself made a pilot in order to save the Nantucket pilot's fee to all ships he was concerned in, for he never piloted any other craft. Bildad, I say, might now be seen actively engaged in looking over the bows for the approaching anchor, and at intervals singing what seemed a dismal stave of psalmody to cheer the hands at the windlass, who roared forth some sort of chorus about the girls of Booble Alley with hearty goodwill. Nevertheless, not 3 days previous, Bildad had told them that no profane songs would be allowed on board the Pequod, particularly in getting under way, and Charity, his sister, had placed a small copy of Watts in each seaman's berth. Meantime, overseeing the other part of the ship, Captain Peleg ripped and swore astern at the most frightful manner. I almost thought he would sink the ship before the anchor could be got up, and voluntarily I paused on my handspike and told Peaquod to do the same, thinking the perils as we both ran in starting on the voyage with such a devil for a pilot. I was comforting myself, however, with the thought that in the pious Bildad might be found some salvation, spite of his 777th lay, when I felt a sudden sharp poke in my rear. I turned round and was horrified at the apparition of Captain Peleg, in the art of withdrawing his leg from my immediate vicinity. That was my first kick. "Is there the way to heave in the merchant service?" he roared. "Spring, thou sheephead, spring, and break thy backbone. Why don't ye spring, I say, and off ye spring. Quahog, quahog. Spring, thou chap with the red whiskers, spring there, Scotch chap, spring, thou green pants, spring, I say all of ye, and spring your eyes out." And so saying, he moved along the windlass here and there, using his leg very freely, while the imperturbable Bildad kept leading off with his psalmody. Thinks I Captain Peleg must have been drinking something today. At last the anchor was up, the sails were set, and off we glided. It was a short, cold Christmas, as the short northern day merged into night. we found ourselves almost broad upon the wintry ocean, whose freezing spray cased us in ice, and as in polished armor. The long rows of teeth on the bulwarks glistened in the moonlight, and, like the white ivory tusks of some huge elephant, the vast curving icicles deepened, depended from the bows. Lank Bildad, as pilot, headed the first watch, and ever and anon, as the old craft deep dived into the green seas, and sent the shivering frost all over her, and the winds howled, and the cordage rang, his steady notes were heard. Sweet fields beyond the swelling flood stand dressed in living green. So to the Jews old Canaan stood, while Jordan rolled between. Never did those sweet words sound more sweetly to me than then. They were full of hope and fruition. Spite of this frigid winter night in the boisterous Atlantic, spite of my wet feet and wetter jacket, there was yet, then it seemed to me, many a pleasant haven in store, in meads and glades eternally vernal, that the green grass shot up by the spring, untrodden, unwilted, remains in midsummer. At last we gained such an offing that the two pilots were needed no longer. The stout sailboat that had accompanied us began ranging alongside. It was curious and not unpleasant how Peleg and Bildad were affected at this juncture, especially Captain Bildad, for loath to depart, yet very loath to leave for good, a ship bound on so long a perilous a voyage, beyond both stormy capes, the ship in which some thousands of his hard-earned dollars were invested, a ship in which the old shipmate sailed as captain, a man almost as old as he, once more starting to encounter all the terrors of the pitiless jaw, loath to say good-bye to a thing so every way brimful of interest to him. Poor old Bildad lingered long, paced the deck with anxious strides, ran down into the cabin to speak to another farewell word there, again came on deck and looked to the windward, looked always to the wide and endless waters, only bounded by the far-off, unseen eastern continents. Looking towards the land, looked aloft, looked right and left, looked everywhere and nowhere, and at last, mechanically coiling a rope upon its pin, convulsively grasped stout Peleg by the hand, and, holding up a lantern for a moment, stood gazing heroically in his face, as much to say, "Nevertheless, friend Peleg, I can stand it, yes, I can." As for Peleg himself, he took it more like a philosopher. But for all his philosophy, there was a tear twinkling in his eye when the lantern came too near, and he, too, did not little run from cabin to deck, now a word below, and now a word with Starbuck, the chief mate. But at last he turned to his comrade with a final sort of look about him. "Captain Bildad, come, old shipmate, we must go. Back to the mainyard there. Boat ahoy! Stand by to come close alongside now. Careful, careful. Come, Bildad, boys, say your last. Luck to ye, Starbuck, luck to ye, Mr. Stubb, luck to ye, Mr. Flask. Goodbye and good luck to ye all, and this day 3 years I'll have a hot smoking for ye in old Nantucket. Hurrah and away." "God bless ye and have ye in his holy keeping, men," murmured old Bildad almost incoherently. "I hope you'll have fine weather now, so that Captain Ahab may soon be moving among ye. A pleasant sun is all he needs, and ye have plenty of them in the tropic voyage ye go. Be careful in the hunt, ye mates. Don't stave the boats needlessly, ye harpooners. Good white cedar plank is raised full 3% within the year. Don't forget your prayers either, Mr. Starbuck. Mind that cooper don't waste the spare staves. Oh, the sail needles are in the green locker. Don't wail too much on Lord's Day, men, but don't miss a fair chance either. That's rejecting heaven's good gift. Have an eye to the molasses, cheers, Mr. Stubb. It was a little leaky, I thought. If you touch the islands, Mr. Flask, beware of fornication. Goodbye, goodbye. Don't keep that cheese too long down in the hold, Mr. Starbuck. It'll spoil. Be careful with the butter. 20 cents a pound it was, and mind ye, if— Come, come, Captain Bildad, stop palavering. Away." And with that Peleg hurried him over one side, and both dropped into the boat. Ship and boat diverged. The cold, damp night breeze blew between them. A screaming gull flew overhead, and the two hulls wildly rolled. We gave 3 heavy-hearted cheers, and blindly plunged like fate into the Atlantic. This is the end of chapter 22. So Peleg and Bildad captains who were outfitting the ship. One of them was a pilot. Now, a pilot is somebody who guides a boat in a harbor. So that is that requires special knowledge of where the harbor sits, all of the various different things that you can run aground on, and the way the currents flow in the harbor. Because harbors are connected to the ocean, but they have a shallower bottom because the ocean is like miles deep. But harbors tend to have shallow bottoms, and there can be currents and tides that are peculiar to the harbor. So, for instance, if the harbor is formed around a creek that enters, water enters the creek, and or the creek enters the harbor, and the area around the creek is brackish and less dense, and because it's less dense, boats tend to sink deeper there. So you have to know about the rocks that are higher up in the areas where the boat sinks deeper. So you have to watch out for those areas. Because there's land around it, it can create winds that are different. So, out in the open ocean, the wind is fairly constant from one direction depending on where you are, and, it changes with weather patterns. But with the land being around parts of the harbor, what you can have is you can have these places where the wind's blowing this way over here and this way on a different, slightly different part. So what happens is you have these places where the water tends to eddy. And so the pilot knows all of the different peculiarities of the harbor. So Bildad was a pilot, and he only piloted his ship because he didn't want to pay the money for an actual pilot. And they still use pilots today. For instance, the Ever Given, when it wrecked, or not wrecked, but when it ran aground a few months ago, was under the command of a pilot. And because the pilot knows, okay, this is the way you go to the Suez Canal. So pilots are still important today because they know the harbors. And often it's go this way, go that way. But there's good money in piloting, and it's kind of a home every night thing, which is good for a seaman. But you notice that Bildad and Peleg both didn't really want to leave the ship. They were always like, okay, do this, do that, do the other thing. Don't forget about the cheese in the hold. You don't want to keep that down there too long. Oh, run inside and tell this to Ahab. Run out, do this. And so they were running back and forth. And they both wanted to go out, even though they knew that that would be 3 years away from family. They were missing the sea that much, and the sea was really calling to them. Um, so gives them warnings, don't go whaling on Sunday. At the same time, if you see a good whale, don't let it just go. So they were back and forth on a bunch of things. Um, the gull over the boat might be considered an omen. There's a poem called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner that I will probably read to you at some point. And that's about an albatross that was a bad sign for a ship because the ship was out at sea, the calm, no wind, and there was the albatross, and everyone was like, the albatross is the problem. The thing is that birds tend to stay close to shore. So if you're out in the middle of the ocean and you start seeing shorebirds or start seeing birds, you're getting close to land. So just keep going in the direction that you want to. Another thing, they said the price of lumber was up 3%, which sounds tiny. It kind of is tiny. But the thing is that if the price is fairly constant, 3% can be a big jump.